May 3, 1993, exactly 30 years ago, idineklara ang araw na ito bilang World Press Freedom Day ng United Nations General Assembly. Ito ay pagtugon doon sa dumadaming attacks laban sa mga mamamayan o mga journalists mula 1991 or even before 1991. Kaya in 1993, 30 years ago, sabi ng United Nations General Assembly, magtalaga tayo ng World Press Freedom Day. Ito yung araw kung kailan dapat inaalala natin, dapat lalo pa nating ipinaglalaban ang karapatan ng ating mga mamamahayag bilang isang institusyon na nagsisiguro ng karapatan nating lahat sa isang demokrasya. Actually, hindi naman dapat May 3 lang natin ito ginagawa. Dapat araw-araw isinasaisip natin, isinasa puso natin, lalo na ng mga ng mga kinauukulan, yung kahalagahan ng pamamahayag ng media sa isang lipunan, lalo na sa isang demokrasya. Ang tema ng World Press Freedom Day ngayong taon ay Shaping a Future of Rights, Freedom of Expression as a Driver for All Human Rights. Ngayong araw na ito, mapalad tayo kasi makakasama natin ang ilan sa mga batikan, award-winning, at mga matatapang na mamamahayag na patuloy na lumalaban para sa karapatan ng media. Ang pamagat ng ating programa ngayong araw ay Fight for Truth and Human Rights, Report Presentation and Roundtable Discussion. Ito po ay inorganisa ng UP College of Mass Communication at ng ating partners Freedom for Media, Freedom for All Network. Ang network po na ito ay binubuo ng iba't ibang mga mamamahayag na I'm sure familiar kayo sa mga organisasyong ito. CMFR, Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, Minda News, PCIJ, PPI, at NUJP. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo ngayong araw na ito at sigurado po ako magiging makabuluhan po ang ating talakayan. Ngayon, nais ko pong tawagin ang dekano po ng UP College of Mass Communication para magbigay ng pambungad na pananalita, Professor Fernando Paragas.
Chancellor Edgardo Carlo Vistan II, colleagues, students, and friends in communication and media, good afternoon and welcome to the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communication. I'm welcoming you during a moment of great uncertainty for our field of communication and media. The pivotal role of responsible media in the public sphere is being contested by a new breed of communicators who are savvy with engaging audiences through new platforms. The form and the language of the screen and of storytelling, the tastes and mindsets of audiences, the technologies that enable mediated communication, and the structures and motivations of organizations are all changing rapidly. And we seem to be trying to adapt constantly to change rather than proactively taking charge of it. Sa mga panahong ito na maraming kaganapan at kaguluhan, ang maaari natin gawin ay balikan ang salig natin. Through the noise of technologies, the diversification of audiences, the transformation of businesses, and the changeability of our platforms, we return to why we are here in communication and media to begin with. What is our North Star? We are here because we value our democracy, of which we are a central scaffold. Any omission on our part, any dereliction in our duty, will result in the weakening of our democracy. Conversely, as we practice our profession ethically, we honor and ensure our constitutionally guaranteed rights to free press, free speech, and free assembly. And these freedoms are hard-earned. Dean Luis V. Teodoro, who passed away just 51 days ago, spent his life fighting for it. After this forum, we will dedicate a corner of our library to him and his life's work as a small token of our deep gratitude for his service to our college and the country. Indeed, Dean Teodoro and his contemporaries, before, during, and after the declaration of martial law, rallied together with many dedicating their lives for us to regain our freedom of the press, speech, and assembly. We honor them today as we open our media freedom wall for journalists and media practitioners killed in the line of duty. In closing, let me thank our partners in holding our forum today. Thank you to the Freedom for Media, Freedom for All Network, and its partner organizations, the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, the Philippine Press Institute, the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines, and Minda News for being our co-organizer. Thank you especially to Carmela Fonbena and Rowena Carranza of PCIJ for really being our close partners in organizing this forum. Thank you to Mamelinda Quintos de Jesus of the CMFR for preparing and presenting the research that we will be listening today. Thank you to Howie Severino, Jeff Canoy, Rambo Talabong, and Kiara Gorospe for sharing your expertise with us. Thank you to our faculty, staff, and students for joining us in our event today. Lubha akong masaya na nakita andito kayo ngayong hapon na ito. Alam nyo, personal mission ito ng kolehiyo na pabalikin ang ating mga mag-aaral sa mga forum na katulad nito dahil ang pag-aaral ay hindi lamang sa four walls of our classrooms. I'm really happy to see all of you here this afternoon. Finally, thank you also to those who are joining us online via Zoom and watching our live stream in the DZUP 1602 YouTube page. Times are changing, and to paraphrase the song by Carole King, malamang hindi na alam ng mga bata ito, we are literally feeling the earth move under our feet, the sky tumble down, and our hearts start to tremble. But we will prevail dahil matatapang tayo, at dahil kailangan nating iprotektahan, dependahan, at inurture ang ating demokrasya through our media practice that upholds our shared appreciation and respect for press freedom. Mabuhay at padayon sa ating lahat na mamamahayag, mananaliksik at mga creative worker para sa bayan.
Maraming salamat din, Paragas. Ngayon ko lang naisip yung I feel the earth move under my feet. Hindi nyo alam yon ano? Hindi nyo alam? Google nyo na. Carole King, napakagaling na Wow, for Press Freedom Day. Carole King on Press Freedom Day. Pero tama po yung sinabi ni Dean Paragas na ang trabaho natin dito sa College of Mass Communication, hindi lang mag-aral at magsaliksik, pero yung lumubog sa ating lipunan at bahagi ng mga prinsipyong pinapalaganap namin dito sa universidad, yun nga yung sinabi ni Dean Paragas kanina na ang pagkatuto or ang learning ay hindi lang dapat na ilalagay or kinukulong sa apat na sulok ng isang classroom. Marami rin tayong matututuhan sa ibang mga lugar, sa iba't ibang mga sektor. At ngayon, mapalad kayong lahat kasi kasama natin dito yung ilan sa ating mga mamamahayag na marami talagang maituturo sa inyo. Ngayon naman, pakinggan natin ang keynote message ng ating bagong Chancellor ng UP Diliman. Palakpakan po natin, Chancellor Edgardo Carlo Vistan II.
Maraming salamat, Department Chair Cara David of the Department of Journalism. And good afternoon, everyone. Dean Fernando Hernan Paragas, of course, of this college, the College of Mass Communication, Chairman Howie Severino of the Board of Editors of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, Executive Director Melinda Quintos de Jesus, of the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, Jonathan De Santos of the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines, our roundtable discussants, Jeff Canoy, Rambo Talabong, and Kiara Gorospe, and the other members of the faculty of the college, and perhaps faculty members of other units present, students, staff, and guests. I believe I can speak for the entirety of UP Diliman in thanking all of you for organizing and making this event possible and for leading our community's commemoration of World Press Freedom Day this very day. Freedom of expression as a driver for all other human rights. This is the theme for this year's commemoration of World Press Freedom Day, as already mentioned by Cara earlier, no? and chosen by the United Nations, particularly the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO. This is also a variation of this is also the theme of this event. Let me springboard then from this globally shared theme of the day and share a few thoughts as I weigh in on the topic of this afternoon's discussion. The theme for me is an important throwback to the role of the traditional or mainstream media or the press in our society. A logical and current reframing of how press or news media earned the designation of being the fourth estate. Dubbed as the fourth estate then, although I'm not sure if you still teach that here, the press was an external or outside factor that checked and influenced the other power wielders in society, who were historically the different branches of the British Parliament, or the more familiar three branches of government of the US tradition. The press earned this title by establishing itself as a vigilant guardian of liberties and the welfare of the common folk, that expressed wrongdoings of government actors, and that framed the discourse on burning issues of the day to inform and shape public sentiment and the calculations of the political elite. The press and other news media could do this because of the notions, now called fundamental rights, of freedom of speech and its more recent and expansive cousin, freedom of expression. Thriving best when these rights or liberties are rigorously upheld by the very government actors they were meant to check, but perhaps its role more dramatically highlighted when these freedoms are suppressed. A steadfast and resilient press is the foremost champion of free expression. This important role of mass media has been repeatedly affirmed during the decades that have passed, since the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and its kindred international instruments that expressed humanity's desire to identify and thereafter protect common basic entitlements and liberties of individuals and communities. In the process of being the main purveyor of free expression during this period, we have seen the press go beyond protecting the freedom that animates it to protecting other freedoms and human rights, such as the right to life, freedom from arbitrary detention, the rights of women, children, and other erstwhile marginalized sectors, and the right to equal treatment by our public institutions, the most recent and major manifestation of which is gender equality. By being in the thick of significant events in all parts of the globe and exposing and providing seething commentary on real-life violations of human rights as they unfold, the global community is definitely more aware now of the various human rights concepts and even theories that used to be the exclusive domain of diplomats, lawyers, and academics, thanks to our press or news media. I would even pose it to say that mass media's constant and responsible wielding of its main weapon or tool, which is freedom of expression, is not only the driver, but is the fountainhead of most notable efforts to promote and protect human rights. In other words, it has almost become essential for mass media to ignite or champion a mass movement for human rights advocacy, for such movements to have meaningful impact. Human rights discourse and practice has definitely changed since the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Many things have also changed since then, and some of the developments that are most relevant to what we are commemorating today is the rise of social media as a veritable fifth estate, a less disciplined cousin of the press or news media. And secondly, the attack on the rights to life and liberty of media practitioners. These may seem disparate developments, but I believe they both represent formidable challenges to the role of the news media that I have been discussing with you. As a law professor who teaches and studies constitutional law and the Bill of Rights, and who also spends time studying and reflecting on the dynamics of the interactions of technology, society, and legal institutions, how the press or the Fourth Estate reacts to and perhaps filters and checks the unwieldy Fifth Estate is to me the cutting-edge free expression issue of the day. Fake news and related ills that are somewhat protected by current formulations of the freedom or the right to express oneself freely can easily undermine the gains achieved by the responsible exercise of this freedom, primarily by the press. How the press can neutralize this possibility will be crucial to sustaining free and productive discourse on various issues. The second development I mentioned is a more direct threat to free expression and the members of the media who practice and champion it. In the Philippines, journalists, broadcasters, and other media practitioners now live under a credible fear or threat of losing their lives, suffering physical harm, or being deprived of their freedom with the spate of attacks, killings, and unwarranted criminal prosecutions of your colleagues. These clear human rights violations and the chilling effect they engender need to be addressed. As expressed by the chosen theme for this day's commemoration of World Press Freedom Day, any effort to address these issues must be driven by an unobstructed and constructive discourse that would identify underlying causes and craft solutions that are consistent with the very freedoms and rights we all wish to protect. This afternoon's presentation and roundtable discussion is a timely intervention along these lines, and we congratulate and thank the College of Mass Communication and your partners, Freedom for Media, Freedom for All Network, for providing this venue and opportunity to carry on such a discussion. I would like to close my message on that note. Thank you very much, Dean Hernan and the College of Mass Communication and your partners for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts on the theme of the day. And I wish you all the best as you carry on the rest of your activities to commemorate World Press Freedom Day. Muli, maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Chancellor Vistan, para sa inyong keynote at message. May dalawang punto na inilahad kanina si Chancellor na I hope madidiscuss mamaya doon sa panel discussion. Very interesting yung sinasabi niya. Dalawa yung challenges ng media sa ngayon. Una, yung pagsisiil sa karapatan at pananakot sa media na nararanasan natin ngayon mula sa iba't ibang institusyon ng lipunan. At pangalawa, yung sinasabi niyang Fourth Estate at paano ito makikipag-ugnayan sa Fifth Estate o yung social media. Alam natin ngayon, game changer itong social media at kailangan talaga nating isa-isahin kung paano nga ba natin mapapalagana pa rin ang karapatan at ang katotohanan sa gitna ng pagkakaroon ng ganitong institusyon na Fifth Estate nga kung tawagin kanina ni Chancellor Vistan, yung social media, lalo pa sa larangan ng pagdami ng disinformation, ng fake news sa mga panahong ito. Ngayon, isa pang keynote message ang ating maririnig mula naman sa Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. Palakpakan po natin ang Chairman of the Board of Editors ng PCIJ, ang aking kaibigan at ka-eyewitness, si Howie Severino.
Salamat, Kara. Akala ko bibirit ka rin na kanina ng Taylor Swift. Chancellor Vistan, Dean Paragas, maraming salamat. Thank you for hosting this event. Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. At my gratitude also to UP College of Mass Communications and Freedom for Media, Freedom for All Network for organizing this forum. There are so many depressing trends these days that press freedom sounds like a contradiction in terms. The upside is, in free societies, journalists are known to be bearers of bad news. As a wise man once said, in countries where the media is full of only good news, the jails are probably full of good people. There are good people in our jails, but many of us are also still out here, alive and kicking. So allow me to be a Pollyanna today, a bearer of optimism. I actually have what some may see as a low benchmark for optimism. Simply put, we've survived. We're all survivors in this room. First of all, we've all survived the worst of the pandemic, far from a guarantee when many loved ones didn't make it. And for those of us like myself who got COVID in that terrifying first year, we don't take our existence now for granted. This must mean something. Secondly, we survived Duterte. Not all of us did. But those of us in this room are living to tell the stories of those years, even after that regime did all it could to silence us. Instead, one of our colleagues even won a Nobel Prize and has been calling attention around the world to our collective plight and heroism. There is an absence here that we all feel. The absence of Luis Teodoro. I can imagine him scoffing at any complaints we may have about our contemporary world, having spent 7 months in prison during martial law, along with thousands of others. He lived to tell the tale of martial law and was an example of staying true to his principles and acting on those principles until his last breath. Which brings me to someone who is still very much alive and very much with us. Melinda de Jesus, whom we will all be listening to in a few moments. Most of you know of her as an explainer and critic of media, who comes up with thorough and thought-provoking reports on occasions like this. I've known of her long before I met her. As a young journalist in the 1980s, I looked forward every week to the next issue of Veritas, the news magazine she was editing at the time. Like many in the alternative press during martial law, Veritas was brave and enterprising. But I also recall its elegantly biting prose. And I was probably not the only one who told himself, I also want to bite with elegant prose someday. So, thank you, Melinda, for that inspiration. In today's report, Melinda helps us recall that Duterte's animosity to the press was, quote-unquote, contagious. But we can also say that courage is contagious. That has been passed down from Luis and Melinda's generation to mine and to Kara's generation, and now to many of you in the audience and the current leadership of the PCIJ. May you all continue to infect each other with courage. Maraming salamat at mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you, Howie. Yes, courage is contagious. Nakakahawa ang katapangan. Kung may isang bagay na dapat tayong mahawa, iyon na yung inspirasyon ng katapangan, lalo na sa pamamahayag. Maraming salamat, Howie, for reminding our students of the courage that we should all have para ipaglaban natin yung ating propesyon ng pamamahayag. Sa puntong ito, gusto ko munang tawagin lahat ng ating mga speakers kasi para mamaya kung merong aalis ng maaga, makapag-picture taking tayo ng maaga. So nais naming tawagin si Dean Paragas, Chancellor Vistan, and all our partners, Howie, and all our panelists, Ma'am Melinda, dito po sa harap. Jeff, yung mga partners po natin from Freedom for Media, Freedom for All Network. Ariel, my good friend. Ma'am Melinda. Ayan. May ano ba to? Age, ano? Ganon. Uy, di ako upo. Di ako upo.
Kanina, sino bang peer natin? Pag-media. Okay na?
Okay na.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat. Maraming salamat. Sa puntong ito na yung inaabangan natin at highlight ng ating hapon ngayon. Nais ko pong tawagin ang nagbibigay po ng inspirasyon kay Howie at sa marami pang ibang mga journalists katulad namin para po magbigay ng report tungkol sa state of press freedom in the Philippines. Executive Director for the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, CMFR, palakpakan po natin, Melinda Quintos de Jesus.
Maraming salamat, Kara. Again, to the Chancellor, to the Dean, honored guests, maraming salamat for having us here this afternoon and for having a live audience for the last 3 years, 2 years. We have indeed had to do this on Zoom, which is challenging, but we did it, and we did report, and we shall continue to do so, and thank you for being here. Maraming salamat po at kayo po'y dumayo ngayong hapon. This annual exercise, let me just say, on a personal note, thank you so much, Howie, for that blast in the past, from the past. It's an invigorating that has actually lifted my spirits that I have to confess my threshold is so low for frustration, disappointment, disenchantment, expecting the worst so that every little bit, like Howie's remembrance of what we might have done then, can lift up my spirit enough to be able to do this, hopefully, with some elegance as well as bite. This annual exercise is rooted in the context of human rights as a manifestation as well as a mechanism of democracy. CMFR has always understood press freedom not as belonging to the press or as a right of journalists, but that it is a right that belongs to citizens, to all who live in a democracy. The press provides them with a kind of news and information that empowers them as citizens with the capacity to participate in a public forum, to ask questions, to express their ideas, to think, to be critical, and finally to choose their leaders wisely, as without Democrat leaders, democracy falls apart. The collection of data that we're presenting to you this afternoon is still a work in progress as we want to be able to finalize it in some form, but the stuff or the information that I will give you, I think is enough, good enough, for you to begin thinking about the state of press freedom today. It has enabled FMFA to act, to do advocacy, to campaign, to consolidate the spirit of journalists wherever they may be, even those that do not agree with one another, that they belong to a pillar of democracy, that they are part of the fourth estate. We have hoped to be able to identify cases that demonstrate how easily human rights can be trampled on or trivialized by those in power. This year, we are presenting two levels of evaluation. First, what we do usually is related to the level and the nature of attacks and threats against press freedom based on consolidated data of both CMFR and the NUJP. So we have put together our cases and compared. Additionally, we present the map of space and time given to news and public affairs in the Philippine broadcast media. Why? Because it is news and public affairs that creates citizenship, and it is broadcast media that is now the primary source of political information. We all agree the dramatic decline of print as a medium for all the various reasons which I will not discuss anymore. This year, with hardly any news about the event, the Kapisanan ng Broadcaster ng Pilipinas, KBP, celebrated its golden jubilee, 50 years, when broadcast media evolved to become a prime source of political information and news for Filipinos. For good or for bad, radio and TV have sustained operations during periods of dramatic change. It was established during martial law as a mechanism for self-regulation while observing the terms of coverage set up by government. It was understood they would regulate themselves according to the framework of communication set up by the Marcos regime. So the KBP were on site to cover People Power events of February 1986, the shaky transition to democracy where we witnessed about 7 attempts to bring down Corazon Aquino, the EDSA dos, which threw out the actor President Joseph Estrada, and more. This afternoon, we will focus on the present. Those of you who are here joining the exercise for the first time may have a lot of questions. We may not all be able to answer all the questions, but the fact that you are asking questions justifies the program. We begin, therefore, with the graphs that present the nature of attacks and threats against press and journalists in the last 10 months. We have focused on the period after Ferdinand Marcos Jr. took office. Why? Because Duterte had done his damage, counting whatever cases there was. It will come out in our yearly reports, but I am not focusing on it anymore. Duterte's personal animosity, as everyone has said already, is or was contagious, as when he started insulting journalists, when he started using obscenities on the public stage against and at targeted media personalities, a lot of people thought that was the way to do. And public officials and other government agencies also followed suit. And we know from our reports how these increase each year, noting assaults, physical, verbal, digital, harassment, banning of journalists from public events, among many others. When Duterte resolved to end the communist insurgency, law enforcement agencies, through the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, or the NTF-LCAC, initiated more red tagging of media members and their organizations. Note, please, that as far as we have checked, there is no law that bans any ideology of any organization. Why? Because we have freedom of speech, we have freedom of thought. Media, however, is obliged to update its public and the people about the state of insurgency But reporting on them and being in touch with them does not make reporters insurgents. And yet media and individual journalists have become highly vulnerable to such actions by law enforcement agencies. Also targeted are the NGOs which publish content related to their campaigns and advocacies. Indeed, military personnel have gone as far as raiding university libraries saying this is subversive, this is communist, and we must pull them out, in direct attack of another important freedom that you should know about, academic freedom. President Marcos, on his side, has been amiable toward the press. His brief speech at the KBP Jubilee ceremony noted the low-ranking 157th the Philippines is in a ranking of countries in the Global Press Freedom Index. And yet, what did he say? He said he hoped to positively improve this ranking working with the KBP. As far as his words and his speeches, President Marcos seems to have turned the page on his predecessor's record. But actions speak louder than words. And there has been, at this point, no real visible action to prevent the kinds of attacks that made Duterte's regime as dark as it could ever be for the media and for democracy. The improvement, however, let's be optimistic, it shows that attacking journalists and the media and insulting them is no longer government's number one priority. Let us look at the graphs. CMFR and NUJP recorded, and we are focusing on the 10 months, 75 attacks and threats against media workers from June 30, 2022 to April 30, 2023. 40 of the cases of intimidation include 31 cases of red tagging media members or news organizations and 8 cases of surveillance. Why do we pull out surveillance? Because if you have not been yourself an object of surveillance, you don't know how that feels. That you are watched, that there is someone standing outside of your office, that there is a car parked in front of your home. You don't know how that makes you feel until you have suffered it. We have 10 cases of libel and cyber libel involving 2 arrests and 1 conviction. In many democracies, libel is no longer criminal and can no longer throw a journalist into jail. There were 2 killings during the period. Ray Blanco on 18 September 2022 and Percy Lapid on 3 October 2022. This broadcaster criticized Duterte, continued to criticize Marcos and government actions which followed the media, and he was followed by countless Filipinos. The color elements were easy to follow, and therefore media followed it daily. After all, the procedure had already been featured in a movie where hired assassins in prison were taken out and were then given the liberty to kill. Police investigation has identified, indeed, in the real life investigation, that a ranking official is now the alleged mastermind. Including Lapid's case, 41 cases involved state agents. This, again, we have been tracking from the beginning, and we have been doing this since 1990. Yeah, that's how old I am. No denials. 41 cases now, when before only the military, and not even so many military, were involved in killings. state agents as perpetrators, 23 from national government, 12 from the police, 6 from local government. How dangerous can a world become for people who are doing this job? How much more killings? How much more danger and peril? With red tagging as the category with the highest number suggests that Marcos may not have yet departed from Duterte's custom of deploying law enforcement agents on all fronts, including the pandemic, remember? In fact, 76 exceeds the number of attacks and threats in any 1 year during the term of Duterte. Kinompare po namin dun sa mga ibang taon na tinignan namin yung total numbers, napakataas ng 76. Even compared to the yearly assaults that we received under the worst era ever. This suggests that Marcos has not pulled away from that pattern of showing state agents themselves actively going after the media. That, I could stop here actually because that's sad enough. And we want to be optimistic. But we have to move into another level of media containment. I'm calling it containment for now. We may find a better term. We have scanned the media landscape, mapped the space and time given to news and public affairs to examine another aspect of control. These programs, after all, are what makes or enables citizenship, without which there is no real citizenship building in the media when you're only considering entertainment and recreation. We want citizens who can think. We want citizens who can evaluate. To observe the dramatic change in print, the pandemic caused numerous, and I'm just going back to the print space here to note that something that you don't pay much attention to because you live and study in the NCR, that community-based publications, one that I had cheered in a column when I was still a columnist that said this is the sign of real growth in the press, that the community press has now become a true and genuine market. Well, the pandemic kind of took care of that. One only has to pick up any broadsheet to know the diminished presence of print, and one has only to check what's available in your 7-Eleven or any other convenience store on a daily basis to know how much we have lost. So we are concentrating on television and the digital shift in delivering news. Television arrived in the Philippines in 1952. As a child, it was our magic box when we finally got one in our home. And into the third millennium had surged as a primary source, not just of entertainment, but it had become a major source, the most dynamic way, in fact, of getting your political stories. Even the spread of social media has not dislodged TV's primacy in the Philippine media landscape because social media still carries TV content. According to the Philippine Statistics Authority, in 2019, 97.5 households in the country have a TV set pa rin. And because advertising revenues pay for the service, Filipinos get all this free, as a matter of speaking. That medium has dominated Filipinos' consumption of news and information with the evening newscast and the nightly public affairs, unfortunately, a little too late for many who work. Of course, we know that more than anything else, Filipinos turn to television for entertainment. Ayaw na nilang makinig ng news. To be in the know, to be connected with celebrities, connected to the faces and personalities of noontime variety shows, soap operas, day or prime time. But the pandemic and the governance closure of the major broadcast network, ABS-CBN, caused the earth moved under my feet. Although, if you really listen to the lyrics of Carol, the earth moved for other reasons. The two combined to cause drastic changes in countries' TV viewing habits. First, during the pandemic, more people watched television. The rise of 24% in viewership from 3 and 31 minutes on to 4 hours and 22 minutes in May 2020. As the pandemic persisted, however, television production of programs also got affected. First, they lost the variety shows, which had to take in live audiences. They lost the capacity to send out production crews to shoot on location. Countless drama shows, etc., were no longer there. TV networks had to come up with new ways to create content, moving programs to online platforms. Networks such as GMA7 and TV5 strengthened their own streaming services, while ABS-CBN turned completely digital because digital is not contained or ruled by franchise. The closing down of ABS-CBN, if anybody still here thinks that there were real reasons for closing it down, forget it na. The Committee on Public Utility denied its application after it had operated and succeeded in its last 50-year franchise. It should have been routine, and yet it turned out to be a disaster, which all of you should simply accept and say and understand as abuse of state power. ABS-CBN had 143 broadcast stations nationwide in places where other channels did not want to go. Its closure was therefore a major blow to the industry, cut off communities where only ABS-CBN could give them free TV. That closure had another effect. It suggested to all the newsrooms, to the owners of the news enterprises, that this can happen to you too, huh? And that contained the impact, the impulse to get the stories, to look for stories, to search out the stories, and stay in a quiet, safe zone, except for the exceptions that my colleagues who have come up on stage have already called attention to. Another quick look. The entry of Manuel Villar is what happened after post-pandemic, and after the closure of ABS-CBN is the entry of another media mogul whose wife and whose son are two sitting senators. Manuel Villar is the owner of All TV, who won the franchise or got the assignment of ABS TV's channel's franchise. Does it have the capacity? Has it shown its capacity? Well, since February 6, 2023, it was launched in July 15, 2022, some of its programs were temporarily shelved due to unknown reasons, and its 19-hour programming has now been cut to 10 hours and 3 or 30 minutes. Meanwhile, ABS-CBN has been scrambling to get their programs on transmission through various different channels, among them the A2Z channel owned by the religious leader Eddie Villanueva, which operates in a number of key cities. It currently has A2Z, 22 broadcast stations nationwide, and ABS-CBN is now a block timer in these, as well as tried to pursue an agreement with TV5 that did not flourish because of the threat of getting more investigated, ABS-CBN has now become a content creator according to its own TV head, Lauren Tidiogi, dealing more now or dishing out more entertainment than news. So it's not a very happy sight, at least not for press freedom. I hope you agree. CMFR did a quick scan of the NTC complete list of operating TV stations nationwide, and ABS-CBN is now currently airing in 49 broadcast stations nationwide, and this number is only 34.27% of the 143 stations prior to its closure. Meanwhile, GMA7 continues with 106 stations currently operating. Actually, the context of this reduction you must hold also with the understanding of how little news and information we actually are producing. The KBP members are not obliged anymore, as they were during martial law, to give primacy to news and information. The KBP now, in a free, supposedly free environment, ever since or post-martial law, has only required no 30 minutes of its programming time. So sometimes if you wonder how easily social media captures the public mind, this is one of the answers. We have never made news and information the main grid that it should be in a democracy. The time and space that no one touches, not even advertising. I will not go into more details. Let me just, unless Spencer, you think that I should. Okay, in the circles, yes, you can see how small that portion is that provides in the NCR the amount of free TV. Of course, CNN is an exception because it is an all-news channel, as ANC would have been, right? Government PTV4 carries government information and news, much of which is, we will have to admit, propaganda. The three others that give out what is called political or news happen to be church-owned. And these include Kiboloy, the Iglesia ni Cristo, and Eddie Villanueva. Am I right? Yeah. All right. So, based on Kantar's media studies, the habits have also changed. TV viewership decreased from 94% in 2019 to 89% in 2022. That's relatively small. Online content, however, increased from 59% to 76%. Radio listening decreased slightly, but radio has kept steady. So these are the areas of hope. We can keep all of these areas alive if we think strategically, where will the active journalists want to show their wares? The internet has become democratic space for all sorts of content, catering to a wide variety of audience. And to reach the growing online demographic, print, radio, and television have created their own online versions, not only as a repository of previously published, but also as a platform of living or live original content. How are we doing in digital space? I am going to do this very, very quickly. The observation that I think I want to share with you, and this I I'm really abbreviating what we have prepared because I want the roundtable to have enough time to hear out your question, is that while both the internet and the social media, do you? Yes. Both the internet and social media show wanting information. In social media, it is only the wanting news stories. Unfortunately, in the social media, journalists and news organizations come only on the 12th rank. Hindi nila kinukuha yung kanilang hinahanap na news stories doon sa mga mamamahayag na naturuan na kung paano gawin ang business ng news. So it's an ironic outcome. The reality, we need to kind of like go back there, change the framework, try and find ways of reaching these audiences that are apparently, or when they started, wanted to know about news. And they went elsewhere and got captured, and now they belong to the silos, which I, in my dismal outlook, can't see how we are going to get them out of there. But this is my concluding message. News must follow the audience. News must go where the people are. News must create the different ways of keeping it all interesting, making it more relevant making it more interesting because it is relevant. You have to touch base with your audience. You have to know about them. You have to connect with them. You have to make them part of the news and draw them in, just as they were seduced by social media providers, which unfortunately outran us when they went and used social media for government purposes as well as for other fake purposes. The situation remains fluid, just as the music market seems now to create special audiences for record players, for LPs. Who knows what event, what technological brilliance is going to give us another miracle, another magic moment with technology that will somehow bring us to a level of engagement like nothing we have ever seen. And here in my 70th decade, late, I allow myself to dream. What we've done before, it was easier to do then. It is more difficult to do now. But you have more to prepare you for it. You have had the punishing experience without necessarily being imprisoned for it, without necessarily having to lose friends and colleagues in the battle. You might combine the greater hope with the cynical, skeptical, journalistic outlook to check whatever anyone of importance tells you, because that is the beginning of the lie. The office provides more amplification of the lie. And so covering government beats, covering public officials, with my due apologies to the university officials who are here, who are still government officials. We must, in fact, call on the champions on the other side to join us, because we will be the leaders, or you will be the leaders of the future. Thank you very, very much for the attention that you have given me. And good.
Hay, buntong hininga muna tayo lahat. Parang grabe yung yung lungkot Maraming salamat po, Ma'am Melinda Quintos de Jesus. Palakpakan po natin si Ma'am Melinda ng CMFR. Ang bigat ng kalooban ko habang tinitingnan ko yung mga slides kanina. 75 incidents ng attacks and threats to journalists. Tas ang pinaka nakakalungkot doon, majority nito ang alleged perpetrator ay yung mga tao at mga institusyon na sinasabing magpoprotekta dapat sa atin. Tapos nung binanggit yung tungkol sa dominance ng entertainment programs, lalo na sa broadcast industry, para akong sinaksak pa ulit-ulit sa puso. Kasi yun na nga po, ang kalaban na po namin ay antok. Yung aming mga news programs masyado ng late at hindi na halos napapanood. Mahirap talaga yung pagsubok na nasa ating harapan ngayon. Pero all the more na nagiging mahalaga yung trabaho natin sa media. Habang dumadagdag yung mga pagsubok, lalong nagiging importante ang trabaho natin. At huwag natin kakalimutan yung kasaysayan natin sa media. Di ba laging ang sinasabi, the Philippine press was born and nurtured amidst a climate of political reform. May tradition tayo of freedom. Panahon pa ni na Marcelo H. Del Pilar, yung La Solidaridad, kilusang propaganda. Itong mga panahong ito, we were born and nurtured na may struggle na talaga. At critical ang papel na ginagampanan ng media para sa kalayaan at kasarinlan ng ating bansa. Sana po maipagpatuloy natin ito sa kabila ng pananakot. Sana mapagpatuloy natin ang ating trabaho sa kabila ng lumiliit na pagpapahalaga sa balita. Sa punto pong ito, magkakaroon po tayo ng roundtable discussion kasama ang ilang mga miyembro ng media. Nais kong tawagin ang aking kaibigan, journalist and documentary filmmaker Jeff Canoy ng ABS-CBN. Si Jeff po ang magsisilbing moderator para sa discussion na ito. Freelance journalist Rambo Talabong. Ng Rappler. Journalism major and student leader, Kiara Gorospe ng UP CMC. At meron din tayo mga representatives from the CMFR, PACIJ, NUJP, PPI, and Mindanews. Bahala na si Jeff.
Thank you, Cara. First time kong magpasalamat sa isang GMA anchor na ganitong ka-public. Maraming salamat, Cara David. Salamat po sa pagpunta lahat dito. I think very important masagot yung tanong ng marami dito sa kwartong ito. Who is Carol King? Tanong ng mga Gen Z. Kilala ko yan. Joke lang. Kala ko kaya ko pang samahan ng aking mga kahenerasyon. Pero hindi ko na pala henerasyon. Medyo malalim siyempre yung mga narinig natin mula kay Ma'am Melinda. So bago ko siguro tanungin yung aking mga co-panelists dito sa forum, malaking tuwing parang sinasabi ni Ma'am Melinda yung ABS-CBN, parang hindi ko alam kung kinikilabutan ako. Parang sabi nga ni Cara, yung kutsilyong tuloy-tuloy na sumasaksak sa'yo. Pagkausap ko yung mga kaibigan ko sa newsroom, we always, or mga journalists from across other newsrooms, sa mga inuman, kasama ni Jonax, we always talk about complex PTSD. Di ba yung PTSD, may something traumatic that happens to you, and then you move past it. Complex PTSD it's a prolonged period of trauma, of torture. And for many of us, it felt that way. And for some of us, we're still dealing with it. Every time na magsaswipe ako ng ID card sa ABS-CBN, for example, I remember that If we used to be 11,000, we're no longer 11,000. Every time that I scroll through social media and I see my former staff, na mga young journalists who have moved on to different corporate or government jobs, nararamdaman ko yung sakit na, sayang yung kinabukasan ng mga batang to. Parang nabawasan kami ng mga tao na magtutuloy ng aming tradisyon. At dahil nga malaki yung naiwang puwang, dahil sa iba't, di ba, yung spasyo ng democratic space natin, it became smaller over the last few years. Dahil lumit yung espasyo namin, mas lumaki yung puwang para sa disinformasyon at sa kasinungalingan. If you ask me in 2020, ba't hindi ka nagti-TikTok? Di ba? Tatanong mo ka lagi, ba't di ka nag-Instagram or nagre-reel or what? And I always say, like many other journalists siguro of my generation, it's not for me. I grew up with newspapers, with TV, with radio. So I always say, it's not for me. And then now I am on TikTok and on Instagram and on Facebook. Because, as Mabilinda said, you have to go where the audience is. I think not only did the ABS-CBN shutdown forced a lot of people to move to digital, the pandemic also changed so many of our behaviors that all of us are online, di ba? Marami tayong nabago sa kilos at mga ginagawa natin. So, pagdating ko nga, ngayong sumusubok na ako sa isang landscape na hindi ko alam, I sort of regret saying 3 years ago na that's not for me. Because, yun nga, it was up to us to actually safeguard yung ganitong social media against the fake news, the misinformation, the disinformation, but the journalists weren't there. Yun yung malungkot eh. We sort of allowed this to fester. Pero, yun nga, ngayon nandito tayo, I think ang mahalagang trabaho ngayon ng mga journalists is not only to debunk the fake, but also to curate the truth. Because it's not just us who are telling truths online now. We have so many people from various sectors, the academe, the historians, the doctors, the pharmacists, influencers who are committed to the truth. So I think it's very important for the journalists to do what we did before, which is to give them a platform to amplify those voices, to amplify that truth. So, saan ba ako papunta sa sinasabi ko? Again, medyo marami pa akong take-away iniisip sa sinasabi ni Ma'am Melinda. But essentially nga, kailangan nating mag-catch up. Lahat tayo, hindi lang ako, but I think a lot of journalists kailangan mag-catch up. Kasi, lagi kong binabalikan yung epekto ng shutdown. And one of the biggest effects, obviously, is disaster coverage. Before may mangyayaring bagyo, 3 days, 2 days pa lang, takbo ka, Jeff, takbo ka, punta ka doon. Nung pandemic, tatakbo ko, pupunta ako. Ay, hindi pala, kailangan ko ng permit, quarantine pass, mag-quarantine ka ng 7 days. By the time na makapasok ka doon sa i-cover mo, nakapagtayo na yung mga tao ng bagong bahay. Eh, ang hirap noon for Manila reporters. Kaya naging medyo Manila-centric ulit ang reporting because for us, ang disasters before, we would rely on our regional stations. We had people on the ground speaking the languages, reporting in the languages of the people who are there. So, basta naiintindihan nila yung banta sa kanila. At yun yung lagi kong iniisip, we lost those frontliners. Ang daming mga regional reporters na nag-suffer dahil sa nangyari. So, I hope yung mga ganung factors is we really have to address those holes. Yung puwang na sinasabi ko, kailangan nating hanapan ng paraan para mapunuan yon. So bago ako magtuloy-tuloy, gusto kong pakinggan din siyempre yung saloobin ni Rambo na isa sa mga nagsabi 3 years ago na hindi, I am for this platform. So si Rambo, as you may know, has been part of the TikTok journalists. May ganun pa rin talaga ako, no? Kasi part pa rin talaga ng ano ko. Pero, yan, baka may gusto ka sabihin, Rambo.
Ayun, hello guys. Thank you so much for the invitation po at saka salamat sa pagdalo sa forum and thank you Jeff for that introduction. Yung mga sinasabi actually ni Ma'am Melinda kanina, parang malungkot, sobrang nakakalungkot talaga siya. Pero parang ano rin, ang nakakalungkot din, parang hindi rin siya nakakagulat kasi lived experience siya para sa mga journalist na nandito. Yung report kasi talagang, di ba, tinali ni Ma'am Melinda tapos Sa amin, syempre balita yan sa amin eh. Sinusundan natin yan araw-araw sa bawat pagpatay, sa bawat pag-surveillance, sa bawat statement ng mga journalista. Merong pinlant ang mga pulis at ang mga sundalo sa kanilang bahay at inaresto sila. It is a lived experience and napakahirap niya. Kasabay pa niyan yung tungkulin natin na maghanap ng balita. Tapos sinabi na rin kanina, kasabay din dyan yung pagpunta namin sa bagong mga lugar, natin sa bagong mga lugar kung saan hindi tayo sanay. Ang kwento ko naman sa TikTok, 2021 naman ako nagsimula. May delay din ako ng konti, denier din ako kasi nung panahon na yon, 'di ba, puro renegade yung simula ng pandemya, sayaw lang yung mga tao. So sabi ko parang ayokong pasukin to, medyo tsaka, magano muna ako, let's do award-winning journalism. Let's do investigative journalism. Let's stay with text. I want to be recognized. I want to keep our officials on their toes. Sabi nga nila, reporters are the conscience of their officials that they're covering. Yung gusto ko lang, and sabi ko, sapat na ang text dito, ang galing na nito. Pero isang araw, inassign sa akin ng editor ko, I believe it was Miriam Grace ko, Ramboy, cover mo nga yung registration ng mga bata, yung mga first-time voters, kasi parang makikita mo dun yung pulso ng kabataan yung mga first-time voters. So, nag-interview ko ng mga kabataan, at may isa akong hindi makakalimutan ng interview. 3 araw siyang pumila para lamang makapagrehistro. Gumising siya 5 a.m. araw-araw. Day 1, day 2, hindi siya nakapagrehistro. Kasi sobrang haba ng pila at alam niyo na naman ang problema ng ating bureaucracy. Tapos 3rd day, finally 5 p.m. nakapag-register siya. Sabi ko, bakit ka nagtsaga? Kung ako ikaw, parang gusto ko nang mag-give up kasi 3 araw tapos hindi ka pa rin nakakaboto. Sabi niya, hindi po napakahalaga para sa akin ang pagboto. Tapos sabi ko, bakit ginawa mo yun? Ano yung political awakening mo? Sa akin kasi nung panahon ko, ang political awakening ko, yung pagbabasa ng mga long-form journalism sa Inquirer, sa Rappler, New York Times, Washington Post, sabi ko, gusto kong maging ganito. Ang sabi lang niya sa akin, sa TikTok po. So ako natameme ako, parang, hindi ba sumasayaw lang kayo dyan? Sabi niya, hindi po Maraming mga taong nagpapaliwanag kung bakit mahalaga yung ginagawa namin bilang kabataan para bumoto at makihalubilo at talaga mag-participate dito sa proyekto na tinatawag nating demokrasya. At doon ako nagsimula na, oo nga, kailangan ko na rin magsimula. At 2 weeks later, after days of sleepless nights, kung saan papasukin ko ba to para nakakahiya kasi baka i-criticize ako ng aking mga colleagues. Parang ang gusto naman ng colleagues ko, text journalism at saka legacy journalism. Pero ayun, pinasok ko at marami naman tao ang sumunod, may mga nag-share. Pero syempre, ang maibabalita ko rin at alam niyo na rin naman ito, hindi sapat ang TikTok. Hindi sapat ang short form video, hindi sapat yung pagpunta dito sa mga bagong espasyo. Kung merong mga bagay ako natutunan at ni-reinforce lang to ng ating usapan ngayong hapon na ito, 3 things. First is rights are not guaranteed. Sabihin man natin na may karapatan tayo, karapat-dapat na meron tayo na karapatan na pumunta at mag-report ng malaya. Wala tayo nito. Naalala ko yung colleague ko si Pia Ranada, hindi pinapasok ng Malacanang kahit na Malacanang reporter siya. Sa ang mundo, pwede yon. Sa Pilipinas, pwede. Naalala ko si Lady Ann Salem, inaresto kasi may planting ng evidence ng mga baril ng mga bala sa kanyang bahay. At syempre, naalala ko si Percy Lapid. Pauwi lamang siya, pinagbabaril siya dahil lamang nag-report siya. Pangalawa, kaakibat ito, trust is not guaranteed. Napakalaking gap ito sa generational gap to sa newsroom. Napansin ko rito sa Rappler na parang may tradisyon ng mas legacy reporters natin na pinagkakatiwalaan kami. The fact that I did reporting means that I will be followed, my work will be shared, and I will make impact. If there's anything that the Duterte administration did, it destroyed us, and of course, it also humbled us. We are no longer gatekeepers. Kahit na pumunta dito sa mga bagong lugar na ito, hindi pa rin tayo pinagkakatiwalaan ng mga tao. Ang karapatan natin ay wala talaga. Yung yung tiwala ay dapat karapat-dapat na nasa atin. Hindi natin iniisip na meron na tayo nito intrinsically. At yun yung nakakalungkot kasi kailangan natin bumangon araw-araw para ipaglaban ang ating karapatan at ang pagtiwala sa atin ng mga tao. Pangatlo, ito, dahil hindi nga guaranteed ang rights at saka trust and even reach, hindi natin alam kung tayo nagre-report saan ba ito makakarating. Anong gagawin natin, di ba? Kailangan nating lumaban. Paano tayo lalaban? Sa pagtrabaho natin, kailangan pa rin natin mag-report, be it TV, be it text, be it photojournalism, be it TikTok. Kailangan natin lumaban. At kung meron akong iiwan isang bagay sa mga estudyante dito ngayon, napakaraming muka ng pamamahayag. Pwedeng, parang may hype sa TikTok, parang it's the new kid on the block, but it doesn't mean that we have to say goodbye to text. It doesn't mean that we have to say goodbye to photojournalism, to documentary filmmaking na merong malalalim na pananalita. It doesn't mean that. Kasi kahit mga TikTok naman, nire-repurpose yung text, nire-repurpose ang old journalism eh. Maraming mukha ang pamamahayag at sana sumama kayo dito sa laban na ito. Kahit na nakakalungkot, napakaswerte ko at nandito pa rin ako sa industriya na ito kahit na napakaraming nawala. Napakagaling ng mga taong nawala at napakagaling ng mga taong nandito pa rin. So kung kaya niyo pumasok, sana sumama kayo, lumaban tayo na magkakasama.
Thank you, Rambo. Ayan. Yung sinabi ni Rambo, parang bumabalik ako dun sa sinabi nung may Washington Post quote before eh, leave no orphans behind. So yun, so pamamaraan ng dokumentaryo, pamamaraan ng vertical video, ng text, parang kailangan ambag-ambag kung saan tayo magaling, kung saan tayo pinaka-best communicator. I think kailangan natin itulak yun. Kasi tayo lang yung, again, mag-fill in ng gaps na yun. And then, syempre, puntahan natin yung lumaki na sa isang henerasyon na ito talaga ang kanilang isa sa mga main sources of information. Kiara, sa ating student journalist na magre-represent ngayon. Siguro, coming off from Rambo din, baka pwede mo rin kaming kwentuhan na ano ba hindi namin, yung mga may kilala kay Carol King sa upo na to, ano yung hindi namin naiintindihan sa pag-consume ng balita ngayon?
Ayan. Hello. So, ayan, muli maraming salamat sa pag-anyaya at pagsama sa akin dito sa discussion na to. Speaking frankly, at first hindi ko maisip parang what could I bring to the table considering that I'd be with mga working professionals, with people in non-government organizations who really put in the work. But the more I went about it, and of course the more that we listened to yung presentation kanina ni Miss Melinda, that it's absolutely necessary for us to include youth and students in the discussion on the future of the media, on the future of truth-telling. Because, parang we're not immune from these realities. Yung pinakita po kanina na mga statistics on attacks, on various violations against the media, aside from, learning about it in our classes, in an academic capacity, and aside from, common discussions in the news or among ourselves, these are also things that we are witnessing and experiencing firsthand. Maraming mga student publications na nakakaranas din ng mga troll attacks, ng harassment, ng intimidation from perhaps not just offices, but from trolls, even from government offices themselves, from pro-administration bloggers and accounts. And when we're faced with such intimidating instances, siguro, when, siguro yung mindset din ng iba na, ito lang yung natututunan namin, ito lang yung nababasa namin, di ba? How do we deal with these things when we're, kumbaga, baptized in fire, with these kinds of experiences? Mga student journalists, as part of our requirements, kailangan din kami mag-cover, minsan nasa front lines din, ng mga mobilizations, ng mga other events that could also very well put us at risk. These are things that, while we're disheartened to hear about, are unsurprising then, as mentioned din po earlier, and that we're sadly living through these realities. Not just in the sense that we're also experiencing them or getting a taste of what it's like siguro, diba, on the field, but also witnessing that shift to online consumption, no? I'm pretty sure, yun nga, most of the people here in the audience, mga nakikita din naman tayo araw-araw or regularly. Aminin nyo, when was the last time na nanood kayo ng balita sa TV? When was the last time na nakabasa kayo ng physical na dyaryo? Kailan kayo nakinig ng balita sa radyo, di ba? When I'm pretty sure that many of us, no, not just kaming mga kabataan or yung mga students, really most of our information that we're getting is online. And even then, within these online spaces, there tends to be, from experience, no, and from what I would discuss with my peers, a compartmentalization of these platforms. No? Certain platforms might tend to be more, kumbaga, for socialization or to really turn off our minds. Some platforms is where we'd prefer to consume certain information or certain news. No? Kumbaga, that distinction of the serious, the personal, the social. And I think TikTok is really that platform where it really takes on a lot of things for different people. No, there are those who I know really consume their information from TikTok, na doon nga sila nakakuha ng impormasyon tungkol sa nagdaang halalan, no, last year, where they get their news, since there are many local networks also transferring or kind of migrating to TikTok, no, and exploring how to use that platform. But there are also those who I know that really use it to turn off their brains, na ayaw muna nilang mag-isip, scroll lang ng scroll. And while we could say that, yun nga, students, especially from UP, no, really have the capacity to think critically and to critically consume information on these kinds of platforms, dyan din, sa tingin ko, parang naging susceptible din sa disinformation, no, sa casual lies that tend to be told to us. When, yan nga, parang we could very well distinguish or see that these are not true, or that these need to be researched further, or that these need to be looked into further. But because of perhaps their presentation, their delivery, no, the kind of mindset that people go into these social media platforms, that's really where we're caught off guard. And siguro having to be surrounded by this much risk, no, for misinformation, for attacks, for harassment, is kind of what's really scary about yan nga, parang my generation entering this industry, no, na we never know what might come at us. We might never see it coming. We might never know, like, when should we be prepared, diba? When can we kind of put our guard down? Kasi yan nga, parang when it's, I guess, yan nga, while this is more of an experience na talagang nararanasan, no, ng mga working professionals and maybe ng mga more active student journalists, no, now when you're being attacked from all fronts, yan nga, nowhere is safe or nowhere feels safe. Because, yan nga, parang you have print, which is a declining medium. You have social media, which is pretty much the wild, wild west, no, and you really can't seem to find that kind of safe space, no, to really hone your craft or develop in the practice. And then you have these other mediums, no, which aren't quite getting much exposure siguro from yung mga peers namin or yung target audience namin. And you know, being presented with the reality of media as it is right now, it's disheartening, but at the same time, we find the strength to move forward, no, because of the mere fact that there are people who have come before us that continue to weather these difficulties and these challenges, no. Na even among our ranks, there are those, among our ranks or among our generation rather, there are those who continue to put up a front and to really push, no, for the truth, for justice, for basically a better future, not just for media practitioners, but for the common public, no, dahil sila din naman ay hamak sa mga atake at harassment na kinakaharap ng media. So, perhaps not to preempt the discussion, but bottom line, no, it's scary for probably most of us who are entering or just about to enter the industry. But as long as there are people who continue, both those that have come before us and those that will continue to come after us, there is still a reason to push forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Kiara. Actually, maganda yung sinabi mo kasi, sorry, kapag nagtutalks ako usually sa mga schools, sa laging tanong sa akin is why would I want to be a journalist sa panahon ngayon? And I'm sure na narinig mo na rin yan. Kasi, yun nga, unstable yung industry, unstable yung society mismo na supposedly nagpo-protect sa ganitong aspeto ng ating demokrasya. Pero yung lagi ng sagot ng mga nakakatanda, and I always see comfort in that, is that it may be the worst time to be a journalist, but it's also the best. Kasi ngayon tayo pinakakailangan. So sana mas lumami pa tayo at natutuwa ako na may mga student journalists na mas aktibo ngayon at pag nakikita ko dati, student journalist din ako, papakover lang ako ngayon. Nakikita ko nagla-live tweet na rin kayo, you're exposing big stories. So, thank you. Pero gusto kong puntahan ang susunod natin kasi bukod sa she's from Mindanao, she's from Cotabato City, si Gemma. Pero she also teaches sa academy. So, ang nabanggit mo kanina, Gemma, sa lunch, I think pwede mong jump off point yon is mas kumukonti yung mga estudyanteng gustong mag-journalism at maraming mga klase na nadi-dissolve ngayon. Baka pwede mo kaming kwentuhan na syempre yung nangyayari naman sa iyong rehiyon sa Bangsamoro.
Thank you, Sir Jeff. Thank you for having me. It's really an honor. No, I'm not a Manila media, a provincial-based regional. I am from Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. Ito po yung bagong rehiyon sa Mindanao. Under a transition period sa ngayon. So, 2 taon pa lang po ako doon and maraming mga challenges. Sige, una muna yung sinabi ni Sir Jeff na yung mga estudyante, wala na po, nade-dissolve na po ang mass comm courses doon sa amin. Nagtuturo po ako sa mga colleges and university. Nag-stop na rin po akong magturo dahil wala na rin pong nag-enroll. And yun ang isa sa mga problema. Sa amin sa probinsya po, nagsishift sila into other courses kasi nakikita nila, kasi konti lang po yung opportunity sa mga media sa rehiyon and that is true. Okay, so yun sir. And sa Mindanao po, I have list down, okay lang i-share ko lahat. Marami po kami because last month, pumunta sa amin yung International Media Support and we talk about challenges and opportunities, particularly po sa Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. So, una, kami po na regional media, nahihirapan po kaming pumunta sa mga far-flung areas. Especially po yung hostile areas with presence of terrorism. Nandun pa rin po hanggang ngayon. Hindi pa rin po natatapos ang bakbakan. And that is true. And we have wide area of coverage sa Bangsamoro region. Yung mga problema sa island provinces, Basilan, Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, hindi namin nakukuha kasi malalayo po. Ang way of namin para makakuha ng information is through Facebook, nagko-contact sa mga tao doon. But the problem is, hindi lahat kasi may Facebook. Kaya kami sa radio, alam po namin malaki ang papel namin sa pagpapalaganap na informasyon. During the COVID vaccination, BARM, yung rehiyon po namin ang pinakamababa because dahil sa fake news na dulot ng bakuna. But because of radio, we encourage these people. Kasi wala silang Facebook nakikinig lang sa mga marites na dahil sa vaccine, magiging vampire. But kami sa radio, alam namin ang anong papel namin. So, doon po kami nagpo-focus. And in some areas of BARM, this is also one of the realities. Some of our colleagues, with all due respect to them, they are in the payola list of provincial and local executive. I mean, with all due respect, kasi totoo nga po, hindi po ganun karami ang opportunity sa media sa mga regional or provinces po. And cultural sensitivity, mention ko na rin, kasi bago lang din po ako sa Bangsamoro region. I'm a Christian and BARM is a Moro-dominated area. Ang mga tao po doon, pagod na po sila sa mga away, mga crime stories, stories of negativity. Ayaw na nila. Every time nagpapublish kami ng story, they are fed up. Ayaw na nila. Galit sila. Because these people, the hope is high for them. Kasi transition period si BARM, nasa peace process tayo. Ang gusto nila, good stories, good governance, yung mga PR, yun lang ang gusto nila. Mapapansin po namin yan sa mga reactions sa Facebook. So, but of course, that's part of our job. We have to tell stories no matter how uncomfortable the story is. So, ganun po. And we have also the proliferation of DXFB. I know if they're not familiar with DXFB. Ito yung mga media na walang legit media organizations but creating Facebook account and they are acting as legit media personnel. Sa amin po sa probinsya, marami po ito, ma'am and sir. DXFB. Kasi DX kasi is the call radio for Mindanao. DZ for Luzon, DY for Visayas. Sa amin, DXFB. They are not media personnel actually, but they're acting as one kasi, Yun po ang isa sa mga challenges sa aming mga legit and some politicians, they prefer the DXFB kasi nababayaran po sila. Yeah. So, they are not vlogger but they are just acting like they are media kasi sa press con, nandun din sila. Marami sila. Sila pang nauuna sa mga may legit media organization. So another one is, we don't have the issue of harassment and threats among journalists kasi most cases po doon ay hindi po natin masasabi na related sa work niya as a media personality. Yung iba is more on personal. So, although, of course, I came from a province na saan ang nangyari yung infamous Maguindano Massacre way back 2009. But still, meron pa rin kaming issues doon. Marami pa rin kasi konti lang po kaming mga journalists sa probinsya. Hindi po lahat nako-cover namin. Marami po mga issue na hindi naririnig. Konti lang kami. Halos lahat po ng istasyon doon, small newsroom lang po. So, ganon. And then, sa security concern, unlike other media companies, they have the protective gear, they have hazard pay. Sa amin doon ng mga media, wala pong ganun. Opo, kanya-kanya pong ano. And, yun po. Sa opportunities naman, mapapansin namin the PT forms is somehow active naman, kahit papano. And we have, maganda yung camaraderie ng media sa amin kasi pag may issue, especially sensationalized issue involving politicians with goons and guns, nagkakaisa kami. Sabay-sabay kaming maglalabas ng istorya para hindi kami maging soft target. Kasi kung ikaw lang maglalabas ng istorya na may murder case si Mayor, pwedeng ikaw ang soft target. So, nag-unite po kami doon, sabay-sabay tayo. Siyempre, hindi naman pwedeng patayin nila kami lahat. Diba? Malaking issue yun. So, ganun po kami, yun yung mga opportunity sa amin sa BARM. And, so wala na po yung sinatawag na news exclusive, wala po kami doon. We are into sharing information, which is really good. And, maganda sa BARM, kasi nga, transitional period, nire-recognize niya yung role namin na media. Marami kasing mga kailang priority bills na kailang ipasa and partner po nila kami doon. And advantage din is yung mga press release from the different ministries kasi parliamentary form of government si Bangsamoro Region. Available yung mga information. So hindi kami masyadong nahihirapan. So I think yun lang po sa level namin. Thank you very much po.
Parang natin nagtinginan sa...
Saan po kayo sa bar?
Check. Wala na lahat. Ayun. Ayan. Oo, nag-follow lahat kasi sa DXFB. Yan. Gawa tayo ng DXIG para labanan siya. Pero siguro maraming things na nagbago. Isa na yan yung mga rise. Ako, naranasan ko, kinukwento ko earlier kina Dean sa lunch na before, pag mga press conferences, it would be just journalists asking questions. Ngayon may katabi ka ng influencer, may katabi ka ng vlogger. So, ang hirap na, di ba, sabi ko nga nung kinukwento ko na pag kunyari, DOT, magtatanong ka about tourist arrivals or you want to get to the bottom of certain travel restrictions. Pero yung katabi mo sasabihin, ano pong 5 tips na pwede yung ibigay papunta ng Boracay? So, syempre si principal, they would rather answer that than the questions of the journalists. And isa pang nagbago, and I don't know if you've noticed, yun nga, yung pandemic and yung digitalization, yung speedy digitalization in the last few years have actually been used by those in power to sort of protect themselves and their own narrative. In a way na, kapag magte-text si journalist, "Sir, ma'am, penging interview," sabihin nila, "Panoorin mo na lang yung Facebook live ko." Or may vlog akong i-upload. Which is parang ang hirap kasi we can't clarify things and we can't challenge things. We're forced to follow their narrative. So, siguro down the line, I just wanted to ask, kayo ba may mga iba pa kayong napansin na siguro very concerning with regards sa pag-transform na itong day-to-day work natin? Kasi hindi naman to dati ganito.
I think first, a matter of hope. Gusto kong pag-usapan yung mga influencers, mga vloggers. Kasi yung last project ko with Rappler, I did a series of documentaries on the vloggers, the influencers. And they're actually one of the kindest people that I've met on the field. The most hard-working people on the field that I know. It's just that they don't know the rules of the game. How to do journalism, how to ask questions. And they're also beholden, of course, to the profit-making scheme of Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. So once you profile them and you speak with them, they want to do good and they actually know that what they're doing in their heartest of hearts, we're doing good. May komunidad din talaga sila. Pati from our work with them, here onwards, they will not disappear. Dadami lang sila ng dadami. And if we can't fight them, we have to at least join forces or collaborate with them. And there's a lot of opportunity there. Just like journalists, influencers, vloggers are not a monolith. Napakaraming mga mukha niyan. Marami silang pinaniniwalaan. A lot of them believe in human rights. A lot of them also, kahit na silently, stand with us. Natatakot lang sila kasi baka atakihin sila, baka i-single out sila sa mga grupo na talagang predominantly mga hindi din naniniwala sa karapatan natin at saka sa journalism. So there's that, a hope for that. I actually remember covering, while I was following one vlogger, I covered the flag ceremony of Vico Soto. I was the only reporter there and there were 7 influencers. And these are really great, I think, influencers kasi tinatanong nila, kailan po bubukasan yung bagong kalsada dito sa Pasig? Ano po yung mga bagong terminal na binubuksan natin? As in, legit yung kanilang mga tanong. I think local politicians and some higher officials also know that there is power tapping into people like these kasi they also are more embedded in these communities and we might also have spaces to collaborate with them, talk with them, what are better ways to ask questions kasi aminin na natin, even us media, legacy media, people who are in the business of setting the national agenda, medyo meron tayong tradition of let's ask the human rights question. Let's ask the controversial question. Pero the people who are actually following us don't really care, which is sad. But perhaps when we also understand and study how these vloggers, influencers embed and listen and keep their ears pressed to the ground, perhaps our questions can be more enriched. Hindi lang yung one-sided or lagi naman ito sinasabi sa atin, privileged and nasa ivory tower tayo. So a lot of opportunities, studying them, even talking with them, sharing meals with them. Social media, I think, is a battle na napakahirap din na parang tanggap ko na rin kasi the medium is the message, di ba? Napaka-Jorn 101 yan. And what is the medium that we are in? Facebook, YouTube. They are profit-making platforms. Ano magagawa natin? Of course, there's Maria Ressa who's screaming out of her lungs just saying na platform change. But we're not seeing that. So I think for now, once we're out on the field, there's opportunity speaking with these people, engaging with them, and perhaps hindi ko alam kung mangyayari to, baka may collab tayo with them, diba? Parang share tayo sa video, diba mga kalab? Ayun, so yun yung aking reaction siya.
Ayan, dito na lang po. Opo. Siguro, speaking specifically from the perspective of a student, I really mean this to Dean Hernan and Ma'am Cara, I really mean this with all concern and of course with all reverence for the curriculum of the college, but really, I guess the teaching of journalism and media is somewhat outdated. No, perhaps not just in the college, but even outside, no, in other educational institutions in the country, no. While it is absolutely necessary to, of course, stick to the basic principles, no, of truth-telling, to the basic practices, no, of how do you frame a story, diba? How do you write a story? How do you conduct legwork? Parang there really still seems to be that that orientation towards print or at least traditional media when yun nga parang it's good that there are integrations of online media, no? How do we utilize the internet for research? How do we navigate the disinformation landscape online? But I think it's really more than the technical aspect. It's really about how do we face these situations, no? This ever-changing landscape of not just media but also information. How do we navigate, no? When yun nga, parang our audience, or at least yung target audience, no, might not agree or might not favor the platforms that we want to create content for. How do we navigate nga, no, yung mga opposition na hinaharap online, di ba? When stories are produced in real time, when information is released, no, as it's being reported. While yun nga, there are I guess efforts to kind of build that sense of resilience and problem solving that really goes into the practice. There's still yan nga parang that kind of fixation on traditional platforms and methods which I'm sure generations of media practitioners before us have grown accustomed to. But yun ka it's really a dynamic landscape and we're not even sure if yung online mediums or online platforms will remain to be dominant since yan nga, malay natin the next big thing is right around the corner. Opo. But on that note, no, tulad na lang po ng sinabi niya po, no, Sir Rambo, na I guess attacking the issue or kind of navigating this landscape is really going to be multi-tier or multi-level effort, no, na hindi lang dapat saluhin siguro ng media or ng mga information industries or even ng mga communication students. Because really, navigating this information landscape and of course, combating misinformation will require the participation of everyone who's interested and everyone who can within civil society and within these different sectors, no? Siguro on a kind of microcosm level, no? In the university or at least among the youth, no, hindi lang naman mga youth publications or student newspapers, no, ang naghahatid ng balita or naghahatid ng impormasyon. Kasi you also have these organizations, no, whether it be student orgs or NGOs or even other civil society groups that would initiate efforts to produce fact checks or to produce webinars, to produce educational content that advocates, no, for this advocacy towards their specific audience or towards their specific sector. And while I have heard comments na parang, bakit nila ginagawa yan? Hindi naman sila media or hindi naman sila mga nasa communication field. But parang when you diversify these approaches and siguro reach nga these audiences or these sectors that aren't often reached, no, by traditional or even emerging media, that's how we widen awareness, no? Kasi even within the university, magugulat na lang ako na yung mga orgs from yung NCPAG, orgs from business administration, may mga efforts and projects sila para pag-usapan yung disinformation, para pag-usapan yung media, para pag-usapan yung balita. And yun nga, well, we tend to have preconceived notions na about siguro people in these other areas of our university or areas of our circle, parang I'd like to think it's a welcome effort at the very least, no, that the discussion is growing beyond our common circles, no. Siguro the challenge nga na lang, no, of educators and of professionals is to kind of push that discussion in the right direction, no, to really provide the rules of the game as it was put earlier, to really temper, no, the principles and the basic concepts that go into that issue. So I guess that's something that both yan nga, in-open kong challenge siguro sa mga kapwa-estudyante na talagang hanap, siguro yan nga, i-challenge din natin, no, yung mga older professionals or our educators or our instructors to kind of help us in that regard, no, na how do we navigate this? Kasi I'm pretty sure na even our professors, our administrators, our professionals mismo are also trying to navigate that, no. So it's really a shared effort on how we could bring our different perspectives to the table.
Thank you. So, essentially everyone has a stake, di ba? So, salamat. Grema, baka gusto mong dagdagan ang sinabi ni Kiara.
Okay, sige. As talking as a radio person and province-based media, people of my age are stuck between traditional and new media sa akin. Oo. But, ang advantage kasi sa amin, old people still prefer the old media, old generation people. And the new generation people, ito namang mga bagong media. That is why meron kaming Facebook, meron kaming website. We have different platforms. So, hindi problema sa amin yon. Back up lang namin si Facebook. Ang problema lang is walang mga verified button. Mahirap siyang applyan. Actually, yan ang problema po ng mga radio stations and other media outfit po sa probinsya. So, yun ang mas-share ko.
Okay. Pero yun nga, I think we're at an age na it's very reductive to call someone a radio journalist or a TV journalist or an online journalist because we're all multi-platform at the end of the day now. Parang kailangan natin mag-upload sa social media, gumawa ng article, gumawa ng for TV, ng iba-iba eh. So, for me, outdated na nga yung term na very specific pa eh. Kasi lahat tayo, we're all on the same boat at this point in time. So, I just wanted to open the floor and get a few questions from the audience para masagot si Sir Howie ang una magtatanong. Bigatin agad yung una magtatanong.
Na-expect ko student eh.
Di ba?
Feeling student naman ako ngayon. Kasi napansin ko parang may certain assumptions about journalism, no? So I'm just curious how each of you would answer the question, including Jeff, no?
Moderator.
What is a journalist?
Let's start from Grema.
Ayaw mo yan, sir.
What is a journalist? Someone who essentially fights for the truth in whatever medium or form. And corny as it will sound, but at the end of the day, we're answerable to the people. Sila yung responsibility. Sila yung karga natin araw-araw. It sounds so, journalism textbook, but I think the ways of storytelling, the devices of how news are consumed can change over time and will change, but the values of what journalists are asked to do and asked to have will remain forever. Those things won't change. Tama ba, Ma'am Melinda? May on the spot. Rambo, baka mas maganda yung definition mo. Ayan.
Okay. What is a journalist? I guess the easiest way to cop out of this, but this is also how I would answer is someone who practices journalism, and by definition, a person who's always acting, a person always in motion, a person who always is practicing. And what is this practice of journalism? We have corroboration, we have news gathering, we have collaboration, we have fact-checking, we have layers upon layers of verification and editing. Actually, existential question din yan sa akin, Sir Howie, while I was following these vloggers. Kasi, bakit sila nakakakuha sila ng information? Bakit sila kaya nilang makakuha ng audience? At bakit sila nagagawa nilang mapakibo ang mga botante? Pero bakit ako feeling ko powerless ako? At saka, kung napakaraming vloggers, anong mangyayari sa akin, sa ating mga journalist? At our core, ito yung mga meron tayo na wala sila. At babalikan natin yung tradition of fact-checking, all of that. Pero yun din yung problema ngayon eh. At siege din yung mismong definition kasi iniisip na maraming tao kung gine-gatekeep natin ang journalism sa atin lamang na may professional experience, paano yung mga gustong citizen journalism? At to a certain extent, kung i-stretch pa natin yung definition, yung truth-telling, pwedeng talagang journalists pa rin itong mga vloggers. And even a lot of them are actually self-identifying, I am a journalist. I am a citizen journalist. And nahihirapan akong sabihin na hindi ka bahagi. Ikaw ay iba kami, ibang upuan kami. Kaya I think it's a definition with tradition, but also it's also moving. Kaya nahihirapan din ako, sir. Yun.
Parang kinalimutan ko na lahat ng mga natutunan ko sa mga, sa mga basic journal classes. But siguro, journalist, from how I see it, from how I've witnessed it, from how I've experienced it, is someone who deals with the truth. Someone who is first and foremost, siguro equipped and trained to ferret out the truth, to contextualize it, no, to place it within its proper definition and situation, and of course is equipped on how to deliver it, no. Kasi parang I feel like not just myself, but then a lot of the people who've also entered, no, journalism and media and mass communication programs come into yung studies or yung practice namin siguro with that common notion na yan nga, journalist is a news reporter, someone who delivers the news. But I feel like aside from what we've learned and what we've practiced, but also the current conditions would show us that it's really more about more than just ferreting out the truth and knowing how to deliver it. But yan nga kailangan talagang alamin paano i-situate sa proper context, how to corroborate information, how to fill in the gaps, no, sa mga nakuha nating impormasyon. So it's really I guess multi-skilled effort that really requires a lot of that skill in trying to assess the information and trying to be critical, no, of even what we report or what we put up.
Diba? Ikaw yung last ngayon.
Sa akin, simple lang po ang journalist, Sir Howie. Ang hirap ng tanong mo. It's a truth teller with courage. Because everybody can tell a truth, but not everyone has the courage. Even sometimes, this truth will cost our lives. Yun lang.
Thank you. Okay na, sir. Baka may follow-up question ka pa. Mas mahirap. Ikaw, back to you, sir. Okay, so may iba pa po tayong questions. Yes, please. Sorry. Sir, sunod kayo.
So, hello po and good afternoon to all of you po. I'm Angelica Del Carmen. I'm the writer po from the QCU Times publication from Quezon City University po. And nakita ko rin po si Ma'am Cara David sa last convention po ng track. Nandun din po ako nun. Hello po, ma'am. So, I have a lot of questions po talaga, but hinati ko na lang po siya sa dalawa. So, for the first one po is, what do you think is the most important aspect as a journalist job po? So lahat po yun sa inyo. And the second one po is, if you could improve one or more thing about our news and in our industry as a journalist po, what would it be po?
Ako ulit magsistart. I think the value or the quality that I always look for in a journalist is humility. Someone who is willing to accept that he or she or they may be wrong. Someone who knows what accountability is. Because I think accountability is something that's one of the key ingredients of what makes a journalist, and not just anyone else who posts things online or reports things on other mediums. So for me, it's humility. What is lacking in our community, I think, has always been a sense of solidarity. I think there could be more collaborations between newsrooms, more projects between newsrooms. Kasi at the end of the day, kami na nga yung under attack. Minsan, ina-atake pa namin isa't isa. So, and okay lang naman to question things of how, di ba, parang to help improve the industry. But at the same time, I think if we do more work together, we can be a stronger institution. So, yeah.
To me, the most important thing, and this is something that I also grappled with personally, na minsan nawawala rin sa akin, is the belief that things should be better than they are now, not being jaded. Kasi parang being a journalist, kasi nga, nasa definition, di ba, araw-araw mo to ginagawa, masasanay ka, matidesensitize ka sa mga injustices, sa mga bagay na hindi gumagana. Pero dito sa mga bagay na hindi gumagana, for example, MRT breaking down every day, traffic always being there, killings every day happening. Minsan tatamarin ka, wag ko nang gawin yan, parang normal na yan eh. Pero kailangan mong bumangon, kailangan mong ikwento na hindi ito dapat normal sa ating lipunan. Dapat ikwento ko to kasi kwento pa rin ito. Hindi porke sanay na ako, nasawa ako, titigil ako sa pamamahayag. Yun. And the thing, if there's anything that I want to change, I think problema rin talaga to structurally wise, hindi lang siya para decision ng mga newsrooms. The value ng mga journalists, and this is compensation, work conditions. Makakapagsalita dito si Jonax. Kasi bakit ba umaalis din yung mga journalist, diba? At bakit sila nakakatanggap ng payola? Bakit sila nasa payroll ng mga politiko? Kasi kailangan nila mabuhay. Akala nyo pinambibili nila ng Gucci bag, diba? Hindi. May mga anak din yung mga yan. May mga bagay silang kailangan paggastusan. Kung pwede sana maging sustainable in journalism on its own as a career, sana mas magandang ating information ecosystem. But we live in a society. We live in a world, kaya hindi, malungkot.
Skip po na kayo muna dalawa para Sorry Para kayo naman yung sumunod na tanong. May the last two questions na lang, I think si Ma'am Melinda wants to ask and Sir Daddy wants to ask. Sir? So mahirap na naman at parang para tayong nasa thesis defense pala dito.
Siguro dahil medyo kapos na po tayo sa oras kasi alas 3 magsisimula yung Nook and Exhibit. Mabilis na tanong. Sige.
Sir, bago pala yan, bago yung final question mo, si Ma'am Melinda pala wanted to add an answer to Ma'am Angelica's question.
Kasi yung mga tanong ng what is a journalist, I think should be stood on its head. What should journalism be? So, what is the most important thing? Maraming importante. Every time we've held a roundtable or a conference or whatever in the last 32 years of CMFR, you start with a question and it is, well, it will not stop. It will go on forever. Why? Because of the terrible state of journalism, not just in NCR, not just because of Duterte's government, but also because of the lack of development of journalism as it is. So let's understand kung ano ba yung importansya ng journalism. So what should it be? And what is the most important part of it? Somebody said, Ted Koppel, in a forum, said, journalism is an edited process. Have you ever talked about, I know brilliant reporters make journalism, but there has to be an editor. The editor is the one that says, this is the kind of conversation na makukuha ninyo kung dito kayo pupunta. Yun ang nawala na. Dahil kanya-kanya na. So the conversation that keeps us working as a democracy, nagkawatak-watak na po. Nasa iba-iba na kayon tayong silos. Wherever you work, what you should look for is an editor who does the work. And if you look at many places, that is not happening. The news directors are dependent on what flows in. So also with the page editors, they fill up space. So also with newspapers or magazines. We don't have magazines. We don't have the capacity to review ano ba yung nangyari noon na dapat konteksto ng nangyayari ngayon. An editor holds that in the head. It is a mental fire that goes boom, 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 boom. And the best ones in the olden times kept the conversation on the relevant points at which we are being challenged. Who is doing that now? Do we have journalism at all? We have wonderful reports. Can it be called journalism by the piece? Yes. But journalism as a national conversation, as a way of conversing with one another so that we understand kung saan ka nanggaling sa BARM, yung iba-ibang factions ng BARM, nag-uusap ba sila? Sino ang magpipiece together noon para merong mailabas, little by little, in pieces, a way to understand how the problems of BARM, if I may focus on something that has not been covered in the national media, how BARM can become that region that will be the zone of peace and development in this troubled place in Mindanao. Yun po ang kailangan nating maintindihan. Kasi kung gagawin natin na iba't ibang mga perspektibo ang ating titignan, ang makikita lamang po natin yung problema na hinaharap nitong araw na ito. Kailangan po ang pag-iisip natin kasama. Kaya sinabi ko kanina, go where the people are, but do not leave the orphans, as Jeff very well pointed out. Books are important, magazines are important, documentaries are important, and out of all of this thinking, we might be able to recreate a new way of talking to one another, because right now, we are not.
Thank you, Ma'am Belinda. Sir Danny, final question.
Mabilis lang to at siguro hindi na kayong apat yung sasagot. Kung mamarapatin mo, yung isang tanong pwedeng kay Rambo, ang susunod ay kay Jeff naman. Ang unang tanong, mabilis lang. Ano ba yung papel ng wika, Rambo, dun sa pag-reel in ng audiences? Kasi yung mga vloggers, content creators, and influencers, they have something in common. At ito yung mahusay na paggamit ng wika. At in fact, yung ilang mga media organization na wagas kung mang red tag, Filipino rin yung ginagamit nila. Ganon din yung sensationalismo ng mga tabloid, Filipino rin. Pero ang trend kasi ngayon, bagamat kinikilala natin yung katulad ng Rappler at saka ng CNN Philippines na unti-unting pumupunta sa paggamit ng wikang Filipino, by and large, yung concept ng responsible journalism ay talagang English journalism yung kinikilingan. So ano ba yung perspektiba mo roon? Tapos yung para kay Jeff sana, I'm sorry for putting you on the spot dahil ikaw yung pinaka-techie yata sa apat na ito. Pero malamang masasagot mo to. Ano ba ang hinaharap ng periodismo sa panahon ng open artificial intelligence o yung machine learning na tinatawag? Yun lang po. Maraming salamat.
Grabe sir, ang hirap ng tanong niyo dun sa wika, no? Of course, yung wika mismo sa pananalita, you get the audience that you try to speak to. So kung anong wikang sinasalita mo, most likely, malamang sa malamang, yung pananalitang yun din ang sasagot sa'yo. Mga taong nagpipilipino, mga taong ganito magsalita. At kung meron akong shout out, Ma'am Cara, I really appreciate your video about yung Tagalising. I think everybody should watch that. Yung kung paano ka gumamit ng Pilipino. Pinapanood ko pa rin po yun. Napakahalaga ng wika kasi kung meron kayong parehong panalitang sinasabi, bahagi kayo ng parehong village, kumbaga, parehong lugar. Alam niyong parang, galing siya sa parehong konteksto sa akin. Alam niyang inasabi niya kung sinasabi niya pandarambong, hindi corruption. Alam niya kung sinasabi niya ang isang tao ay wali, hindi faded. So dapat mas snappy at sobrang galing dito ng mga influencers, vloggers. Nasa isip ko pa rin ngayon yung napakahuhusay nilang pag-atake sa atin. Tinatawag nila si Maria Ressa na Maria Rehas. At pinsan parang grabe yung kanilang yung kanilang pagbibigay, pagbabansag ng mga pangalan. Kailangan din natin tapatan. Pero paano natin tatapatan yung ganun, di ba? Makakapagbaliktad din ba tayo ng mga pangalan? At most, ang natutunan ko talagang Pilipino yung gumagana sa akin. Pero kung meron kayong sariling channels, kung magsisimula kayo ng YouTube, Facebook, whatever, kung gusto nyo pure English, kung meron kayong particular words na gusto nyong gamitin, deliberate din dapat yan. Kung gusto nyong gamitin ng words na forda, o gusto nyong gamitin words na riz, kayong bahala dyan. It's your own audience, kilala nyo sila. So, ayun po. At ang nakakapagod dito, para makapagsalita ka ng parehong wika sa kanila, kailangan mong i-consume yung media na kino-consume nila. At minsan, nakakatuyo ng utak yon. Pero kailangan mong gawin. Iyan.
Thank you. Thank you, Ramo. Parang mas gusto ko sagutin sana yung tanong din ni Ramo. Pero I think, in a way, babalik ako sa sinabi ni Rambo. Ultimately, I think, syempre, hindi lang yung sa language, for example. Tapos papunta ako sa AI, promise. Pero yung language, for example, it not only gives you power to directly communicate, using Tagalog, for example, but yung audience, at nakuha ko to sa tatay mo sa isang speech na sa Japan, na it also empowers the people na to have that conversation. Kaya gumagana yun eh. Dati, parang paano mo kakausapin isang tao, hindi naman pareho yung salita ninyo. So, babalik tayo sa kailangan may ganung pag-reach out or to make sure na hindi sila maiiwan sa impormasyon na tutulong supposedly sa kanila. Pero ultimately, whether English or Taglish or kung anong mang salita, I think ang hinahanap sa social media ngayon is authenticity. Kasi kahit na ako pilitin kong sabihin Forda or Riz, hindi maniniwala yung tao kasi I don't use those words. So I think yung authenticity is key in getting the information out. So pumunta tayo sa AI, I also think authenticity is what will disable AI to flourish in terms of journalism. Ito rin yung tanong ko kay Attorney Marichu Lambino kaninang umaga sa programa. Ano ba magiging papel ng AI? Sabi niya mahirap, mas kailangan ng karagdagang kaalaman at pag-unawa din ng mga journalists sa bagong teknolohiyang to. Dahil ang daming fronts na pwedeng magkaroon ng plagiarism, kumbaga. Hindi lang sa pag-plagiarize ng mga thoughts, but at the same time, ng kopya. So, it's something that we, at this point, hindi tayo pwedeng ulit maiwan kasi nga, nung rise itong vertical video, lagi sinasabi ng henerasyon namin, it's not for me. Pero nasa puno tayo, actually, it's all, these things, we have to treat it as may stake tayong lahat. So, yun, tinay up ko yung lahat ng sinabi ninyo. So, thank you. Sorry guys, wala nang time. I'm sure marami pa. But I need to turn it over to our kapuso, Cara David. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rambo, Kiara, and Emma for the time.
Anong ibig sabihin ng Riz? Hindi ko alam. Alam mo ba talaga?
Charisma. Napapayag ko yung professor ko ng magandang grade kasi I got the Riz.
For the grade, we need Riz. Ganon. Uy, tama ba yun? Yung ba yung Riz? Okay. Maraming salamat. Palakpakan ulit natin yung ating panelists. Rambo Talabong, TikToker par excellence. Si Kiara Gorospe. At si Drema Kitayen, syempre, ang ating kapamilya. Chief of Reporters ABS-CBN, Jeff Canoy. Ang dami nanig natutuhan sa araw na ito. Para magbigay ng kanyang closing remarks, tawagin po natin ngayon at palakpakan natin, Jonathan De Santos, National Union of Journalists of the Philippines. TikToker ka rin? Hindi pa.
Thank you. Ang hirap sundan ng panel na yun, at lahat ng mga experts na nagsalita. But I will try my best. Ayun, hello Mascom, it's good to be back here kung saan di ako pumasabat. Anyway, ang pinag-uusapan natin kanina, nagbabago yung mga ways, nagbabago yung methods, but unfortunately, and I think Ma'am Melinda will agree, ang isa sa mga hindi nagbabago ay yung fact na under siege pa rin ang media, na we're still under threat, and the struggle continues, nearly a year into the second Marcos presidency, and as many in media adjust to reporting on an administration that is not openly hostile to the press, it's tempting to consider that maybe the situation for media workers has improved and will continue to improve. Partly, this is because the president has been saying the right things, For example, sinasabi niya na he recognizes the role that media plays in society and democracy. Partly also kasi from the previous administration, they set the bar very low. It was in fact almost on the floor. On World Press Freedom Day, we remind ourselves that while there seem to have been concessions and victories, particularly yung acquittal ni Maria Ressa and Rappler sa tax cases nila, Many, far too many of us are still facing threats. We remind ourselves also that our freedom is still fragile. It has been more than 3 years since our colleague, Frenchie May Cumpio, was arrested in a raid in Tacloban City. Frenchie, who had been red tagged and subjected to surveillance before her arrest on questionable charges, based on testimony from questionable witnesses, is still fighting terrorism-related cases and is appealing the forfeiture of money meant to fund her radio show that the government said was to finance terrorism. The slow pace of the case, especially in contrast with the quick resolution of other higher-profile cases, is a violation of her right to a quick trial and also deprives communities on Negros Island that she used to report on and for. The theme of this year's Press Freedom Day commemoration is freedom of expression as a driver for all human rights. And unfortunately, the passage of the Anti-Terrorism Act and SIM Card Registration Act restrict that freedom from which the freedom of the press comes. Frenchie is just one case to show how that can be done and is being done. Since the Duterte administration, there have been attempts to convince colleagues disaffiliate from groups like NUJP and outright attempts to paint the independent and alternative press as enemies of the state. While these attempts have been toned down under the new administration, they have continued, and even attempts to organize within our ranks are viewed with suspicion, if not vilified outright. Policies to block access to critical websites like Bulatlat and Pinoy Weekly have not been reversed, and there are moves in Congress now seeking to penalize fake news, a term that used to mean and that we used to understand as disinformation and misinformation, but that has increasingly come to mean views and reports that are inconvenient to the government. In the backdrop of all these hangs the threat of the use of the tactics used against the Philippine Daily Inquirer, Rappler, and ABS-CBN that continue to chill our community. In the backdrop as well are the unresolved murders of our colleagues, Ray Blanco and Percy Lapid. So on World Press Freedom Day, in this room full of generations of journalists, we remind ourselves that despite all these, we will continue to report. Maaaring magbabago yung forma ng pagbabalita, maaaring magbabago yung hilig ng audience, no? Pero yung trabaho at yung tungkulin natin ay ganun pa rin. And so we will continue to report and we will continue to insist on being free. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Jonathan De Santos ng NUJP. Uulitin ko lang yung sinabi niya, magpalit man ang paraan ng pagbabalita, hindi dapat nagpapalit yung prinsipyo ng pagbabalita. Kanina natitempt akong sagutin yung question ni Howie ng what is a journalist? Tapos challenge ni Ma'am Melinda, what should a journalist be? I leave you with this. Lagi kong sinasabi to sa aking mga estudyante. Tayo, mga mamamahayag, ang mikropono ng mga di naririnig, ng mga inaapi at ng mga binabaliwala ng lipunan. Tayo ang salamin ng katotohanan at tayo ang dapat maging tulay ng kalayaan at karapatan. Happy World Press Freedom Day. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo. Meron po tayong opening ng Dean Luis V. Chodoro Collection and Exhibit. Sa mga nais pong dumalo, magtungo lang po ngayon na sa CMC Library. Salamat po. Magandang hapon.